Week 7, Lesson 2, Fantastic Four, Part 1. The history of the Fantastic Four started on a golf course, where timely editor Martin Goodman would play against his chief rival from DC Comics. They engaged in a friendly match while talking business. Goodman was told that Gardner Fox's Justice League was selling well, the Justice League being a group that was comprised of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, The Flash, and Martian Manhunter. After the golf match, Goodman went to Stan Lee and told him to create a team book. Stan Lee could have just revisited the Submariner, Captain America, and the Human Torch, but went in a different direction. Remember that Stan Lee was getting sick of comics at this point and was about to quit. He was sick of one-dimensional characters and having them act in the ways that no real people would. So, Stan Lee teamed up with Jack Kirby, and together, they created one of the most important teams in all of fiction. Back when Kirby was drawing for DC Comics, he was writing a series called Challengers of the Unknown. It was about a group of 4 individuals, 4 men, who would explore the stranger parts of the Earth and get into many crazy adventures. They didn't have any superpowers, just a love of exploring. Jack Kirby also worked with Stan Lee on Atlas, on a number of short science fiction stories dealing with monsters and aliens. November 1961, for just 10 cents, children everywhere could pick up the first adventures of The Thing, Mr. Fantastic, the Human Torch, and the Invisible Girl, together for the first time in one mighty magazine. You'd never know it by the wording in the title, but this was the first appearance of all of these characters. Mr. Fantastic, whose real name was Reed Richards, was the brains and the leader of the team. He had the power to stretch his body into a variety of shapes, but his true talent was his ability to think. He wasn't just the smartest person on the team, he was the smartest person on the planet. The Invisible Girl, better known as Sue Storm, had the ability to turn herself and others invisible. And at first, this was her only ability. As time went on, and that power became repetitive, she was given the power to create invisible force fields, which she could use to block or move things. The Human Torch was not the android that fought in World War II, but another character with the same powers and same superhero name. He was Johnny Storm, Sue Storm's younger teenage brother, who would set himself on fire without being burnt, and use that power to fly and shoot fireballs. He was another example of a reimagined hero for a newer generation. But, unlike the Flash, Johnny was not smarter than the original Human Torch. Johnny was an impulsive teenager, and could act outright stupid at times. Finally, we have the Thing, who was originally a pilot named Ben Grimm. He was Reed Richards' best friend, and they served in World War II together. The event that gave his friends all their wonderful powers also gave him super strength, but turned him into a hideous monster. Looking at their power set, there is nothing new here. The Human Torch had recycled powers from another character that the company owned. Mr. Fantastic was stretchy, but Plastic Man was created 2 decades earlier. Also, at DC Comics, the Flash had an ally named Elongated Man, who could stretch his body into rubbery ways and use his mind to solve crimes as a detective. The Invisible Girl could turn invisible, but H.G. Wells wrote a story completely based around that concept, called The Invisible Man. Finally, the Thing was a strongman, but instead of looking like Superman, he looked like clay. A super strong individual that resembled clay? This goes back to the Gollum legend. What set the Fantastic Four apart from their inspirations and competitions was that they did not act like traditional superheroes. When they received their powers, they did not try and hide them. They acted in a more realistic manner. Okay, we're going to take a look at how the Fantastic Four introduced into the world. A shadowy figure shoots a gun into the air, creating a symbol that's made to summon the Fantastic Four. Sue Storm turns invisible as she rushes through a crowded street, trying to respond. Her powers are doing more harm than good, and she decides just to take a cab to get there faster. The Thing is completely covered up, trying to hide his deformity as he shops for clothes. Nothing fits him. "I live in a world too small for me," he grunts. When the clerk notices the signal, the Thing throws off his clothes and marches out of the store. He can't fit through the doors anymore, and he's immediately shot at by the police. He's causing destruction simply by walking from place to place. The Human Torch ignites his powers to respond, but by doing so, melts the car he was working on, and later, destroys a plane that was sent to intercept him. He didn't mean for this to happen, but his powers are destructive. Mr. Fantastic saves Johnny from the planes and stops him from falling to his death. He then carries Johnny back to the office where the meeting's taking place and warns his team that they're about to go on a dangerous mission. Right from their introduction, we see that this will not be like any superhero stories that came before it. These powers are dangerous. They have consequences. The government doesn't trust them and sends jets and police after them. They aren't changing into costumes to use their powers. They do this in civilian clothes. Except for the Thing. He can't fit in civilian clothes. The everyday people are scared of them and panicking. So far, this book is reading more like one of Atlas monster stories than a traditional superhero comic. We then get a flashback to the Fantastic Four before they had their powers. Ben Grimm, who would later become the Thing, has a temper and doesn't want to go on an illegal space flight with his friend. Then Susan Storm, the future Invisible Girl, calls Ben a coward, and he agrees to fly them into space before the communists beat them to it. So, all three of them go into space and drag Susan's teenage brother along for some reason. Once in space, their ship gets hit with cosmic rays and crashes down into some woods. It's there where the group first shows signs of developing their powers, including turning Ben Grimm into a hideous abomination. This is important as Ben Grimm was the voice of reason, not wanting to hijack a rocket and take a teenage boy into space. But he's the worst off because of this journey, and it's all his friend Reed Richards' fault. The book is also somewhat self-aware of what's going on with the tired tropes, as the Thing points them out to everyone. Listen to me, all of you. That means you too, Ben. Together, we have more power than any human has ever possessed. You don't have to make a speech, big shot. We understand. We gotta use our powers to help mankind. Right, Ben. Right. This was the story of the monsters and freaks deciding to make the world a better place. For the first two issues, the Fantastic Four didn't even wear costumes or uniforms. They just fought problems in regular-looking clothes. They didn't need or have secret identities. They proudly let the world know who they were, where they were located, and what they did. This made them celebrities in their universe, and they had to deal with the celebrity lifestyle, for better or worse. And when the reader sees how they interact in their apartment, when the eyes of the world aren't watching, their personalities clash. Reed Richards is an absent-minded scientist. He cares more about the latest equations and scientific advancements than he does spending time listening to his partner, Sue. His drive is to invent and explore. He creates life just for the sake of it. He creates a gateway to a dimension known as the End Zone, which he plans to conquer. He is terrible at interacting with other human beings and feels guilt over bringing his friends onto the rocket ship, which gave them their powers. Sue Storm goes on adventures because she convinces herself that she's in love with Reed Richards. She cares more about her fashion than fighting. She grew up in a house with a dead mother and an absent father, meaning that she had to take the role of an adult to make sure that her brother, Johnny Storm, had a chance to make something of his life. Her brother, Johnny, is impulsive. He rushes into situations without thinking about them. He also is going through puberty, so he believes he can take on the world, and doesn't use his best judgment, especially when it comes to women. He leaves the team a few times. The first is because Johnny's sick of taking Reed's orders and wants to do his own thing. This causes Reed Richards to fear for the world, since he's not sure if he could stop Johnny Storm if the Human Torch turned on society. It also helped to find that the Human Torch was not a sidekick. He was one of the first, and possibly the first teenage superhero that was not a sidekick. But by far, the most interesting member of the team, at least in the early issues, was the Thing. Ben Grimm was a handsome man before he got his powers. He feels betrayed by his friend Reed, whose actions made him a monster. He feels like a freak in his own body. He cannot go down the street without people staring at him. He can't get a nice pair of clothes that fit him. He feels like no woman will ever love him. And he gets depressed from time to time. Despite this, the Thing is the heart of the team, with his working class attitude. He knows that Reed Richards is smarter than him, and lets his friend make important choices for him. He knows that Sue will never feel the same way about him that he does about her. He knows that he'll never be able to fly a regular plane again, even though he used to be a pilot. He knows he's better at one thing than almost everyone else. and that's fighting. He's not the most trained or skilled fighter, but he's too dumb to give up, and will continue fighting, even when all hope is lost. He's also the artist Jack Kirby's self-insert into the comics. The Thing was a character that Kirby made most like himself out of everything that he drew. He gave the character his attitude, insecurities, and arguably, his charisma. The Fantastic Four is often called the first family of comics, and for most of its members, it's easy to make that connection. Mr. Fantastic is the father, Invisible Girl is the wife or mother, Johnny is the uncle, but the Thing doesn't fit nicely into that picture. There are at least two ways to add him into the family dynamic. The Thing is either a distant uncle who's known for his eccentricities, or he could also fill in the role of the child. He gets angry easily, but it's a fun angry. He never hurt anyone he knew. He had a simple outlook. He was hanging out in Reed Richards and Sue Storm's home. They leave him behind when they went out on the town. And he was a member of the team that needed the highest maintenance. He was also the one that Reed had to groom for the role in the outside world. So, when looking at the team as a family, especially in the early issues, it could be argued that the Thing fulfilled the roles of the child in the group's family dynamic. As you can guess, putting all these personalities in a room caused conflict. When there were no villains around, the four would argue and fight about little things that families usually fought about. The Human Torch would play pranks on the Thing. The Invisible Girl would get mad that Mr. Fantastic didn't notice her new fashion statement. Mr. Fantastic would get mad at the others for not letting him finish his work. By today's standards, they were simple personalities, but when they first showed up, they were more complex than anything else that had been written in comics up until that time. Many of the most memorable moments of the early issues were when the Fantastic Four weren't stopping a threat, but visiting their fans in the hospital, reading fan letters, or interacting with their local community. They dealt with money problems, tensions with the landlord, and made all those moments just as interesting as fighting aliens or mad scientists. Hopefully, by my description, you can understand that there'd never been anything like this in comics up until this point. These were complex characters, at least for the time, who had unpredictable personalities and became celebrities instead of caution vigilantes in order to save the world. They did small things like read fan mail or interact with random strangers on the street and just hang out. They were the first comic book heroes to do this, which helped make the book an incredible success. But we have just scratched the surface of what made the Fantastic Four great. Next video, we'll take an even more in-depth look at the team. Questions to contemplate. Why do you think Jack Kirby made the Thing his self-insert into comics? At the time, a superpowered family unit was an original concept, but it's been done a few times since. What other superpowered family units can you think of? Are there any that predate the Fantastic Four?